no, but we should go from there to Bowie, because
Sure.
that if you want to just
about the same time, that's the interesting thing.
yeah, exactly. So, so you started by engineering on a record form, and then was asked to co-produce,
Yeah,
right?
two albums. He recorded the single Space Oddity with Barry Sheffield engineering and Gus producing. And Gus produced it because Tony Visconti hated the song and refused to do it. So Gus produced it. It was a hit. So the record company, Mercury, then said, we want an album. So that was then when Tony came in and I engineered it along with Malcolm Toft, another one of the engineers at Trident. We did that. Then it was a complete flop. But record companies, if they signed talent, they believed in it and they gave him a second chance, do another album. And they started, I can't remember what studio it was. It was another studio and it was Man Who Sold the World. And then they came to Trident. I did overdubs and then mixed that. Once again, complete and utter flop. And David took some time off. And in the midst of that time off, he came in to attempt to produce a friend of his, a guy called Freddie Beretti, who became one of his top clothes designers. And I had reached that point. I don't know if you've ever reached it when recording an act with a producer sitting by the side of you. You'll come up with a suggestion, a musical suggestion. This way I always tell the story is when you come up to the guitar solo, I turn to the producer and I say, you know what would sound great underneath this solo? And he said, what? I said, a herd of trumpeting elephants. You think so? Yeah, I think it would work perfectly. Bring in the herd of trumpeting elephants, you record them, they go. If it works, it was his idea. If it doesn't work, it's, yeah. Oh, I didn't think it would work. It's only Ken's idea anyway. But one gets fed up with that after a while and wants to actually be the one that, it's my suggestion, I'll sink or swim from it, by it, whatever. So I'd reached that point, interestingly enough, at the same time as Roy Thomas Baker and Robin Jeffrey Cable had. We all, the three main engineers at Trident, all reached that point at the same time. And so during this recording of Freddie Beretti, I was talking with David and I happened to mention the way I wanted to move more into production, wanted to have more of an artistic say. And he said, well, I just signed a new management deal. I was going to produce an album, my album myself. I don't know if I'm capable of doing it. Will you co-produce with me? Now, my feeling about David at that point was a very talented guy, a very nice guy, but he was never going to be a superstar. And so
2 flops in a row.
Having gone through my first ever assistant engineering job was with the biggest band in the world. My first ever engineering job was with the biggest band in the world. So every fuck up that I made, everyone would hear, kind of thing. It was one of those things. But here's an artist that no one's ever going to hear. So I can actually learn what I'm doing as a producer and no one's ever going to hear my mistakes. It was perfect until Angie, his wife, and his publisher, Bob Grace, came over to my house one evening and we were going through songs for Hunky Dory on cassettes, and within about 2 songs, this was totally different from anything he'd done before, and suddenly it was, here I go again. This could be absolutely amazing. I can't fuck up, basically. It's got to be good. And we went into it. I think we were, both of us, with a certain amount of trepidation because neither of us had really produced properly before. But then as we would try things and things would come together and it was working, just the confidence grew and it gave us the confidence to try even more, kind of thing. And it worked out quite well. But even that was a flop when it first came out. It took Ziggy, which we recorded about 3 weeks after Hunky Dory, and that broke, and then Hunky Dory took off.
And so were those both 2-week records, basically?
Yes.
And that's including mixing?
There may have been a week also tagged on at the end for mixing.
Right,
so 3 weeks in all. Now, Ziggy was slightly different. There would be a little tag on for that because when it was handed into RCA, they didn't hear a single. So we had to go back in and we recorded Starman as a single and put that. We just took Round and Round, the Chuck Berry song, out of it and just stuck Starman in there instead, and suddenly it's a concept album, as everyone seems to think. Yeah.
Well, so speaking of that, because I mean, Bowie's such an enigma as an artist, and he tried everything basically. I mean, he's got a drum and bass record practically, and so did he have that strong of a concept of who he wanted to be as an artist, or was it just that he knew he wanted to pursue art and he would go wherever it took him, or was it focused for those two records? Because they're pretty
absolutely. It was focused for three records. The focus started to disappear when we did Pin-Ups.
Right.
But it started before that. The interesting thing was, one of the great things about David, apart from his vocal ability in the studio, the other great thing was finding the right teams to work with to give him what he was after. After we had done Pin-Ups, I did go on to do one other track with him in Trident. And it was supposedly for Diamond Dogs. It was a track called 1994 Stroke Dodo. It was 2 songs put together. And it was one of David only ever came to 2 mixes. That was one of them. And the entire time that we were mixing, he kept on playing. I seem to remember it as being a Barry White record, but it was probably just a Philadelphia sound record. And he kept on saying, I want it to sound more like that. I want it to sound more like that, which is what he eventually did. He just went over there and got the American band together to give him exactly what he was after. He knew what he wanted, without a doubt.
Right.
He didn't always know how to get there, was the thing. So he would pull the team together and allow the team to do what they do. Complete freedom.
Right.
Once he'd said, this is the direction I want to go in, then it's complete freedom. You do what you want.
So he give you a framework, and then you just go.
Yeah. And for me, like mixing wise, it was the strangest thing ever, because I was used to the whole thing of there'd be me as the engineer, there'd be the producer, there'd be the assistant engineer. At times we'd all be, and there would be complete mixes from beginning to end. We'd all be leaning over, pushing up faders, putting them down, changing reverbs, all of that kind of thing during the entire mix. It was a performance. Exactly the same as the musicians. The mixes then were performances. But suddenly, David doesn't come. He gets bored in the studio. There's no way he's ever going to hang around for mixes. Some of the time, I didn't even have an assistant engineer. None of the musicians were there. It was just down to me. So how was I going to be able to do all of this? And I finished up mixing in sections. It's the only way I could get the changes and everything that I wanted. No pun intended. So I'd do the intro, get that right, cut that piece of tape out, put it to one side. I'd then do the first verse, get that the way I wanted it, edit it onto the intro to make sure the edit worked, and gradually built up the mix that way, which was very strange. I kept on doing that for years. I interestingly enough, now in Pro Tools, I've moved back to doing it that way. I like that way of mixing.
Well, because I think that actually became not common practice, but it was done quite a bit later on in the 70s. I know on a lot of the Yes albums, those were mixed in sections, because sometimes they were tracked in sections. And so that piecing together. Now, when you were doing this, when you're mixing these records on your own, was there an approval process with him at that point? Because it's not like you're going to do recalls.
No, there wasn't. I finished the album. I'd finish the album, send it into the management. They'd send it into the record company. And I always felt we never even discussed the records. Once they were finished, we never discussed the records. I always just looked at it that if he liked what I did, I'd do the next record with him, which is basically what happened. And the only one that there was a problem on, and it wasn't him, it was management and the record company. The opening track on Aladdin Sane, which to me is the worst mix I've ever done in my life. I now listening to it. The concept of the mix was to make David's vocal like one of the instruments, really mix it in with the instruments. So you listen to it and there's nowhere near enough bloody vocal on it. It's buried. So I've completed the album, sent it to the management. They came back to me a couple of days later and said, Ken, we love the album, but can you just do another mix of Watch That Man? And I said, sure. And as you mentioned, it's a completely fresh mix. You start all over. There's no recall, nothing. You start from ground zero again. And I did one with more vocals, sent it to them. They said, yeah, that's better. No, sorry, they didn't. They said, we prefer the original. That was it. Fine.
Right.
Then it went to the record company. They did exactly the same thing. Called me up. Ken, we love the album, but can you do another mix of Watch That Man? I said, I did one for the management company. They preferred the original. Yeah, but for us, can you do another mix? So I had to go in and do a third mix of it. And exactly the same again. Sent it to them. You know what? We prefer the original. Bang. And that's what's on there. And I hate it.
Wow.
I can't stand to listen to it.
But there's obviously got to be something about it, something the way the track was put together for his voice to be buried in it from the beginning. But I think that was also the thing, is that the now so much of the production is actually happening during the mix that you do need the approval process. Whereas there, I mean, things you're recording with intention at that point.
Oh, absolutely. So, and I still do. I EQ on the way in. I finished up now with most mixes that I do. There is no EQ or anything added. I do it all as I record. The only thing that gets changed, because I can't work like you do. I can't work in the box for love or money. I need the console. I need that, being able to push and play with the faders. That's what it's all about for me. It's that the way I put it. And I'm sure you would argue with this.
No, not at all.
That human feel of playing it the whole time. It's like being one of the musicians.
Yeah.
And so that's all I do. I play with the levels, but generally speaking, EQ, compression, all that. Yeah, I have to put some effects on. I put reverb on, bits like that, because I don't record that. But
the tones are the tones.
Yeah.
And you know they work together because you've been hearing them the whole